This old film was the first movies we ever took and shows Mother at Dana Point looking at the waves and then in a moment walking up the old stairs at Dana Point. They're no longer there. Note the gaff rigs on the sailboats. You won't see that anymore. Nye's Baby was a name that I gave to a little sea sled I built, 4 feet wide and 8 feet long. I had a little 2.5 horsepower Johnson on it. This is Frances Smith, now Mrs. Roy Mason, living up in Fort Jones. I was about 12 years old at the time. This picture is with Buddy Trueblood and Jackie Trueblood. Oh, Jackie is now Mrs. Bob Blanchard and lives in Friday Harbor. Look at the old Marion out there with its sail furled. You can see the mud flats are still out in the middle of the bay. The houses across the bay look very much the same as they do now. Isn't that interesting? Clear back in 1926. Not that much changed in the skyline over there. Of course, the mudflats are gone. Toby refers to James Thoburn White of Tustin, and he and I used to play together a great deal. Skimming on those boards was lots of fun out on the mudflats. They'd just skim along. I didn't get on it right this time. And we used to pull these little boats that we made along on a string. I never see anybody do that now, but we had more fun with that. This is Mother and I, and in just a moment, Dad comes rushing into the water. We had tied a rubber band onto the camera. This was an old Eastman Model B that we borrowed for these shots. We didn't own one at that time. I must say I look like an animated mosquito jumping up and down all the time. Mother loved to swim. Clear to the end of her life, she loved to get out in the bay and swim. Here comes Dad. Left the camera on and ran down and had a swim, and now I have to run out and turn the camera off. This is my same little boat, and I borrowed a 16 horsepower Johnson, and I don't know whether it actually went 30 miles an hour, but it sure seemed like it, and there wasn't any speed limit in those days. Dad took these pictures from the end of Joe Beek's pier. Mrs. Matthews, Lucille's mother, sat down in one of those officer's chairs in the sand in front of the house, and we, as you can see, are out there coming in the boat. That's Louis Matthews, Dad, and myself, and my mother. And she falls over, and we all thought that was great fun, and she was a good sport about it. She laughed with all of us. That's Uncle Strawthard on the left, Dr. James Strawthard White of Pasadena, and Louis, as I mentioned earlier. And we're all having a grand time out there in a little kind of a sandbox that we had in front of the house. See, she's laughing about it. Newport Fisherman. Now, this is a later, camera that we borrowed, again, a DeVry this time. Note that there's a sail and oars, no outboard on the old fishermen in those days. That's the same place right next to the Newport Pier where they come in now. But as I mentioned, they use outboards. This is a boat I built, 17 feet long, with sawed spruce frames and mahogany planking, and they had to be steamed, and it was a big project for me, and it took me forever, it seemed, as I recall. I finally finished it and had a lot of fun with it. That's Uncle Roy, and that's Reg on the left. Uncle Roy lived next door. He was an orthodontia. Dr. Roy Meredith White. Dad made a hole-in-one on the old golf course up in Sunset Canyon, and it was actually observed by quite a few of the players, and they sent it in to whoever it is that you send that information into, and he got all kinds of gifts: golf balls, tees, a case of Canada Dry, some golf clubs. Oh, it was very exciting. Reg loved big cars, and he was very excited about buying this Lincoln Roadster. And boy, he was proud. It was a beautiful old car, ran magnificently, and he'd get out and roll out there to Banning, where he was living at the time, at 80 miles an hour, and I guess it really did go that fast. That's what he used to say, anyway. As I mentioned earlier, Uncle Roy lived next door and had his office right in the front of the house there, and he was over all the time for dinner, and Mother was always teasing him. Notice she tries to put a pot on his hand. This is out in the backyard of the home in Burbank there. And that's all there is.